There is war everywhere. We've got the Ukraine, we've got Israel and Palestine, we've got all kinds of conflicts. The question we ask on this channel, independent from all the humanitarian issues of course, is what kind of impact does this have on asset prices? It's rather surprising to look at the numbers. Actually, geopolitical conflict does not have too much of an impact on anything. Let's have a look at the US stock market. Let's have a look at oil prices. Let's have a look at gold. Let's check this all. What we've got over here is the S&P 500 with various conflicts. It's a very long-term chart, almost 100 years in data. And yes, there was a crash leading up to World War II, but during World War II, the S&P 500 actually recovered. When we look at the Vietnam War, the prices of stocks tended to go up. When we look at the Afghan War, stock prices didn't do much. The Iraqi wars triggered a slight increase. It appears rather random, right? It seems like wars don't move, at least the US stock market. Of course, the local stock market is likely impacted, but the US stock market doesn't really move that much based on external conflict. Russia invaded the Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. Have a look at this vertical line over here. This is Brent, so the leading index for oil prices. And yes, directly after the invasion, the prices of oil went up, but they came back to normal levels just as quickly again. And then just 6 months afterwards, we even saw oil prices decline. We are currently at prices that are lower compared to pre-invasion of the Ukraine. And now we've even got Israel and Palestine as well. Isn't that fascinating? There's all the news going around, but in the end, if you really look at the numbers, prices aren't affected that much, at least long term. Prices might be affected for a week or two, but then we already see a correction. Have a look at the dollar strength index. The US gained, relatively speaking, at the beginning phase of the Ukraine conflict. Then a lot of the gains got lost again, and we can't really pinpoint anything here that shows a strengthening or a weakening when the Israel-Palestine conflict escalated. Markets are narrative driven. Demand and supply is shifting based on people's perception of what might happen in the future. But very often the events themselves don't move the markets that much anymore. We are seeing this with wars, we're seeing this with the Bitcoin halving. The event itself doesn't do much. I don't try to predict the traditional markets too much. You don't hear me talking about the stock market too often. I sometimes look at relative valuations, maybe of a stock relative to the S&P 500, but I rarely try to time the S&P 500 because there's simply too much competition. There are too many smart people doing this already. You have to think, where do you have your edge in the market? And everybody can watch the news about war and everybody can act upon this, but you're not really going to time the bottoms and the tops better than your average Joe this way. The reason why I'm so deep in crypto is not because I love the technology so much. It's simply because it's a very inefficient market that has a lot of data that most people aren't using. Thus, we can get an edge over the rest of the market simply by using that data better than others. In the traditional markets, unfortunately, we don't have that. In the traditional markets, we are competing with very smart people. So I believe it's a mistake to try to time the stock market based on news around geopolitics. Let's have a look at Lockheed Martin, right? A supplier of military equipment that should be making a lot of profit with wars. And again, let's not just look at the Lockheed Martin price. Let's look at this relative to the S&P 500. We want to see the outperformance. This here is a very long-term chart. It starts in 1995. Lockheed Martin did outperform the S&P 500 by 75%. It, by the way, also slightly outperformed the Nasdaq. So it's one of those few winning stocks. Not clearly winning, but keeping pace with monetary expansion. Let's go back to Lockheed Martin relative to the S&P 500 and let's see the development since the 24th of February of 2022. That's over here. And yes, the price did outperform somewhat. Maybe some insiders already had an idea of the war coming up and they bought maybe at the beginning of the year. But since that invasion, and since we also now have Israel versus Palestine, even a clear beneficiary of war like Lockheed Martin did not do better than the S&P 500. That's why I like to look at data so much. This is super counterintuitive. So be careful out there. Don't try to trade the news in the traditional markets. Try to pick the one market where you have your edge. Don't get distracted by too much irrelevant information, at least when it comes to investing. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish this regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. There's also free Telegram. Link is down below.